This video is brought to you by StoneAgeGamer.com. It's where I go for my gaming accessories, systems, and more. So be sure to check out StoneAgeGamer.com, link in description. Hey guys, how you doing? This is John with Gamester81.com. This episode I'll be reviewing the Atari 5200 system. This came out in 1982, November of that year, and initially retailed for around $200 US. If you include inflation, that's around $500 today. So the system wasn't cheap. And can you imagine spending that much on a modern console? And just think how much superior these consoles are today compared to what this is in the early 80s. But this is not considered a very successful system by Atari. In fact, this was a follow-up to the Atari 2600, which is one of the most successful systems of all time, one of the longest supported systems of all time, and it's just a great system. This, on the other hand, didn't do very well. By 1984, they pretty much pulled it off the shelves. Video game crash hit. That didn't help the situation either for Atari. But back in the late 70s, Atari decided to enter the home computer market as well. They saw that Commodore and Apple were both being successful with their line of computers. They also saw that the markup for home computers was significantly higher than what you could sell home consoles for. So what they decided to do was they introduced the Atari 400 system, later on the Atari 800 system, and that's known today as the 8-bit line of computers by Atari. And the reason I wanted to mention this is because back in 1980, Mattel introduced the Intellivision in the market, and the Intellivision did very well and took a big chunk of the market share for Atari and the Atari 2600. It was a superior system for sure. And Atari felt that if they actually ported their 8-bit line of computers, because it was fairly successful, to the home system, which basically became the Atari 5200, they saw that as a smart move. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Before Atari came out with the official name Atari 5200, they were actually going to name it Atari Video System X. They eventually changed it, of course, but there are a few prototypes that are floating around that actually work that are titled the Atari Video System X. And the code name for the project was actually Pam, which was named after a female employee that was working for Atari at the time. Some people believe that the name Pam might mean personal arcade machine. That might be the case. It certainly makes more sense. But the reason they named it the 5200 is because it's Atari 2600 times 2. Just like the 7800, which is the system that came out after this, is the Atari 2600 times 3 because it's their third home system that came out. In total, there were 69 games released for the 5200. I own about 32 of them. They're right here. They're, for the most part, arcade ports. They're all pretty much ports of Atari 2600 games. There's no really original titles in the library of games. Although there is a homebrew market for Atari 5200 currently, and people are creating new games for the system. One thing I don't like about the cartridges are that you notice that most of them don't have labels on the top, so if you're stacking them like this, it's hard to see what game is which. Now, Parker Brothers are smart, and they actually came out with some games for it, and they actually had them different. Let me see if I can find one. Here's Fogger, for example, and you'll see that there's actually a label there, so you actually can read the label, which is nice. The games, for the most part, are pretty colorful. There's actually 256 colors in the 5200 system, so it's pretty good, considering that both Intellivision and the ColecoVision, which came out in 1982 as well, had 16. So the color palette was superior, the sprites not so much, and the Achilles heel for the system was certainly the controller, which I'm going to talk about here soon. Here is the box of the Atari 5200. You can see that it's huge. And the Pac-Man game was actually super breakout. Like Coleco at the time, Pac-Man game was Donkey Kong. You can see that Donkey Kong was obviously a superior title than Super Breakout. No offense to that game, of course. But because of that, Coleco sold a lot more systems. And I don't think Atari was really anticipating that Coleco would do so well. There were just a lot of systems at the time. The Vectrex was coming out as well. And there's so many systems, so much saturation. It basically caused the video game crash. And all the systems pretty much pulled out and had a very short shelf life, unfortunately. Now, without any further ado, I'm going to take a closer look at the system itself. I'm going to show you the controller, talk about that because there's some good and bad about the controller. We're also going to do some gameplay and share my final thoughts. Here's a closer look at the Atari 5200 system. First thing that you'll notice, this thing is gigantic. It's 13 inches by 15 inches, and the depth is 4.25 inches. and it's huge. Now, it's bigger than the original Xbox, not quite as heavy as the original Xbox. It's not as dense as that. This is where the cartridge slot is, obviously. And one thing I do like about the cartridges are they have these shields here, these built-in shields, these flaps. So one thing I've noticed, anyway, is that very rarely do the games not read on the system. They're pretty, because the flap, they keep it clean, it reads the cartridges pretty easily, so that's a nice thing. And they snap in there very easily, and they come out nice, so they don't stick in there very hard, so that's a positive. Here's the power button. When you turn it on, there's a red light, indicator light that will show you that it's powered on. You have the 5200 logo here. Here's the flap here, which is where the controller is actually stored. This thing actually comes off. The first run of 5200 systems, actually this, which is this one, has 4 controller ports, which was, I believe, the first system to feature that. Now, I'm not sure why it had that, because no games that I know of actually can use 4 players at one time. Soon after, in 1983, they revised that. They took away 2 of these ports. They included only 2, which is really all that you need. And they fixed the RF adapter, which I'll show you here in a second. On the back, you'll notice it's one of the few systems that doesn't have anything on the back. You're wondering, where's the RF? Where's the AC adapter plug into? Well, if you turn on the bottom here, this is the RF cable, and it's got this nice little place here where you can actually wind it up and store it, which is nice. It's all about storage. You got the controller storage, the RF cable storage. You're still wondering, where does the power AC adapter go into? Well, let me show you. Now, here it is. A lot of people are either fans of this or not so much fans of this. In 1983, the second version I was talking about, in 1983, they quickly changed this. They got rid of this, and they had the AC adapter actually plug into the system directly. But this is the RF switch. The idea was the RF cable would actually plug into here, and your TV would actually plug into RF, and your power adapter, your AC adapter, would actually plug into here, and this would plug into the back of your TV. So basically, you can switch between your TV and your console fairly easy, rather than just going back and changing the fourth. So the idea was just to make it simplified. One thing I like about the power adapter, it's huge. It's got this big brick, but you'll notice that kind of like modern day consoles, it doesn't have the brick, it doesn't have the prongs built into the brick. So I can basically plug this into like a power strip and have plenty of room for it. That's a nice feature. I like that. Now, speaking of game cartridges, there are a few out there, variations. The most common game cart is the one you'll see here. Like I mentioned before in the video, there's no label here, which is you can always, I guess, create your own, but that's a bummer. Here's one. This is by Activision. You'll see it's kind of unique. It's got these tabs here on the side. Here's another one by Parker Brothers. This is actually Frogger 2, the sequel to the original Frogger arcade. You'll see here, I like this probably the most because actually you can see the label on top. Here's one by Sega. It's a little bit more square. Again, they have the label on top. This is Congo Bongo, kind of Sega's answer to Donkey Kong. One huge flaw, and the reason why the 5200 didn't sell very well, was because it wasn't backwards compatible. It couldn't initially play Atari 2600 carts. So even Coleco and Intellivision had adapters where you could play Atari 2600 carts. So why would you buy an Atari 5200 where you can't play Atari 2600 carts when you could buy Coleco or Intellivision, and you could? So eventually what Atari did to answer that was they came out with this adapter here. This is the Atari 2600 adapter for the 5200. So how it works is actually plugs in like so on the top, and you can now put your Atari 2600 cartridge on there. Here's your reset buttons here, and this is where actually the controllers will plug into, and it says, I don't know how well you can see it, it's from Boss, VCS cartridge adapter. Okay, so that's cool. So eventually they did come out with this. Now one thing I'm going to show you is the controller, because it's good and it's bad. You'll see what I mean. The notorious Atari 5200 controller. Well, let me start off by things I do like about it. I like the fact that it featured a start, a pause, and a reset button, so you can actually reset the system right here through your controller. There's 4 action buttons, 2 on each side, and it has a 360 analog joystick, which is the first to have that, first system to have that, which I like. I don't like the way they executed it, but I like the fact that they were trying. And it's got a very weird adapter here. This is kind of interesting pin adapter that's unique to the 5200. Now, things I don't like about the controller, and there's a lot. First off is the analog stick. It's made out of this flimsy rubber here material, which over time gets worn down, and more often than not, they become obsolete if the rubber becomes worn down too much. So also it doesn't center at all. So if you're playing a game, see how it just kind of sticks there? That makes it difficult. The reason they wanted to go with the all 360 directional joystick is because Intellivision at the time was boasting that they could go 16 directional rather than the 8 directional that the Atari 2600 joystick had, and that was big for gamers. And so they decided to one-up it and go 360. Unfortunately, the execution was very, very poor, and they cut a lot of corners. They actually had 9 different revisions for the controller. They tried to improve it, but still, even the later revisions, not very good, unfortunately. Another thing I want to point out about the controller, there's actually overlays. If you look at let me pull this game out here, you'll see that there's actually overlays for, this one's for Breakout. There's actually, every cartridge like this, anyway, has a slot here for overlays, and these actually sight into the controller like so, which is cool. Coleco did the same thing, so did Intellivision. There was something about these numbers and numerical number keypads that were popular for consoles back in the day. Quickly, consoles that followed didn't have those anymore, but I always thought that was kind of interesting. Another thing that was problematic were these buttons here. For some reason, the main action button was the bottom action button here, and these tend to get stuck too. So I find particularly now I have to push really, really hard on these for it to have an action. In fact, sometimes they get stuck, and it's just very, very frustrating to play. So all together, the controller isn't great. The joystick's an issue. The buttons are an issue. I definitely prefer the ColecoVision controller, even though that's not perfect either. And even the Intellivision controller is great. But certainly one of the reasons why the system didn't sell very well at all. In fact, altogether, Atari sold close to 1 million of these, which sounds like a lot, but in standards, really is not that much. And quickly, 2 years later, they pulled out, and they eventually released the 7800 years later. So now what I'm going to do is turn the system on and show you some gameplay of a few games that I own. First game I'm going to show you is Joust. This is probably one of the better home ports you'll find from the arcade. This is a game I remember going over to my neighbor's house and playing quite a bit. I'm using the action button that sticks and it's hard to push, so I'm putting a lot of effort into flying here. The object is to land on your opponent like that and then collect those eggs that they drop. It's a really challenging game, gets a lot of fun. A good port for a home system. Next one is Pole Position, also another arcade port, created and designed by Namco, although it was published by Atari in the arcades. This is one of the first racing games I remember ever playing, and this really set the standard for games like Outrun and other future third, person perspective racing games. This is a great one. Not a bad port. The graphics look kind of like the arcade. Obviously, we don't have the steering wheel. We have the joystick we're using. Here's a game that's a sequel to an arcade game, Frogger, by Sega Gremlin. This is a really interesting port because there's actually different levels. Unlike the first Frogger, it kind of takes the first concept of the original Frogger and just makes it a little bit different. A really fun game to play. Here's a game that we all know and love. This is Miss Pac-Man, also by Namco. And this is actually a really good port for Miss Pac-Man. Although we're using the 360 analog joystick, it does get tricky because it doesn't center. So right there I was trying to go left and I couldn't because of the joystick. Dig Dug, another Namco classic. I remember playing this on the Commodore 64 quite a bit. This port isn't as good as that version of the game, but this is still nonetheless a very fun one. If you play games like Mr. Do, this is a game you'd really enjoy. With arcade port, yet again, this is Star Wars. This is by Parker Brothers, ported by Parker Brothers anyway. Not a great port of the game, of course, although Star Wars Arcade is one of my favorite arcade games of all time, if not my favorite. And it doesn't use the vector graphics, obviously, but still, nonetheless, a really fun home port. Using the joystick's kind of tricky because it's super sensitive with the aiming here. Nonetheless, I really like this game, although I think the audio and music could be a lot better. Overall, what do I think about the Atari 5200 system? I don't think it's a great system. I don't think it's even a good system. It's an okay system. It's definitely a part of video game history. There are a lot of things that started it all with the pause button, the analog joystick, the fact that these games here have shields here to protect The boards is nice, so pretty much they will work pretty much every time. You don't have to worry about blowing on the cart or anything like that. That's a really big benefit. They were kind of being smart with the switch here, which is, you know, the RF switch and how that works. Although they quickly changed that, I still think it's not a bad idea. But obviously, the biggest Achilles heel is the controller, the joystick. You know, if you own 4 of them, 3 of them probably aren't going to work, and the one that does work won't work very well. So that's definitely not a good thing, and just makes the games hard to play. The fact that they released only 69 games, definitely, it's kind of a small library, certainly compared to the Atari 2600 and other systems at the time. But some of the games are decent. If you are a retro gamer and you want to check out an interesting system and you can get it for cheap, definitely recommend at least playing the Atari 5200, give it a shot. But just have the understanding that the system isn't the Atari 2600. It's not as good as the ColecoVision or the Intellivision, but it's just there. You know, it's a system that's it's okay. I'd probably give it like a 6 out of 10. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Please, if you guys want to keep in touch, please follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm also on Twitch TV, as well as my website, Gamester81.com. Please, guys, leave a comment below. Let me know what you guys think of the 5200, and if you guys are big fans of it, if you guys don't like it, why? Please explain, and we'll see you guys soon. Take care. Happy gaming.